everybody, welcome back. Today we're talking about rigorous accountability. Yay! I know that sounds so exciting, doesn't it? I promise it's actually a little bit interesting. So accountability, it is something that it is connected to leadership and discipline. So it kind of builds on what we've talked about so far. But it's something that it brings together clinical care, emotional regulation, and communication. And this is something that sounds like it should make sense and sounds like it should be a no-brainer, but like anything, we actually need to talk about it because it's not always done properly. So what is rigorous accountability? Well, before you can have accountability, you have to have a consistent standard for anything, for whether it's your clinical expectations, your professional behavior, uniform standards, all of it. The whole point of accountability is it's holding to a external standard, an objective standard. So if you don't have a standard, or at least a good standard, then accountability doesn't make fucking sense at all. So, with the understanding that you have to have a consistent standard, rigorous accountability is consistently holding ourselves and each other to a uniform and clearly defined standard. Yay! Rigorous doesn't mean it's heavy-handed, but that it must be consistent and open. And what do I mean by open? This isn't something where, oh, well, we just talk about accountability behind closed doors. Obviously, if you're in trouble for something, yes, that's a closed door conversation. But accountability is something that is out in the open because there should be a uniform standard, not uniform like what you wear, but uniform is a consistent standard for everybody. So if it's consistent and it's open, then in theory, it should be pretty straightforward. Well, accountability requires you being personally accountable for your actions. All right, again, makes sense, but what usually happens? Oh, well, I missed the tube because of this, or I did this because of something else that someone did, or it was so and so's fault. If I was in charge, this wouldn't have happened. Okay, cool. You get the point. And yes, there are external factors outside of our control, but we are still responsible for how we behave and the actions that we take. So, this is something that is both clinical in nature and highly personal. Because, clinically speaking, we're held to protocols, standard operating procedures, guidelines, whatever your agency calls them. We're supposed to have a consistent standard. And I'm not advocating for being cookbook medics. No, that is not the case at all. But there's a difference between adapting protocols to fit the actual real life complaint of the patient, because let's face it, our patients don't read the textbooks. They don't know, oh, you're only supposed to have one problem at a time. That's not usually how it works. So you have to be pick and choose. You have to make some decisions. And sometimes those don't fit neatly and nicely into one little sandbox. Yes, protocols are there for accountability and for liability. However, there's still an expectation of acting in the best interest of the patient, number one. Number two, acting within your scope of practice. And three, communication. If it's something where you really have to go outside of protocol, call a doc. Talk to somebody. That's not insecure. That's being responsible, because you have patients' lives in your hands. So you need to make responsible choices for how you manage them. And you can't always make all those decisions by yourself. And that is okay. I can't tell you how many times I have called a doc and just been, hey, doc, here's what I have going on. Here's what I think I should do. Here's what makes sense to me, but I want to run this by you. Or there's times where I'm like, doc, I have no clue what the hell is going on. Here's the presentation. Here's what we've done. Here's what we found, but I don't really know exactly what the fuck to do. What is your gut response to this? And guess what? 90% of the time, docs love that. Are there those assholes now and then? Yeah, there are. There was one time where someone I knew was consulting with a physician, legitimately, like offering the physician treatment options, saying, hey, here's kind of what I think my options are. What would you recommend? And the doc was like, well, I can't give orders over the phone. Just do your job and follow your protocol. My God, the whole reason I'm calling you is because the protocol doesn't fit the fucking situation. But anyway, I would love to have been on the phone with that doc because that would have been a delightful conversation and would have been a really fun conversation at the ER. But anyway, yes, you're going to run into those assholes, but you're still responsible for going above and beyond. And I would say that is also an objective standard. Like you should be going. Okay, now if you have a hypochondriac, no, you don't need to throw every single possible treatment at them. But if you have a patient who's sick as shit, you should be doing everything that you possibly can. Obviously, prioritize. If you can't get past the ABCs and managing them, then cool. That's all that you fucking do. But if you can get past that, if you can do more, if you have time and resources to actually give the patient all of the treatments available, then by God, you should fucking do it. And honestly, people wonder where AI is going to come into play with EMS. I think this is one. I think this is one area where AI is going to start to slip in, is how we manage our time and prioritize our treatments. Because there are studies showing that AIs can diagnose faster and more accurately than physicians in some cases, and that's just where we are with it now. A year ago, that wasn't even a conversation. Who knows what's going to be 5 years from now? So if you don't want to complain about AI taking your job, you need to do your job well and take it seriously. Now, the messy part with accountability is, well, how do you enact accountability? There is going to be corrective action involved in accountability. Now, whether you initiate that or someone else does is incredibly important. If you basically rat yourself out and say, hey, I messed up. Here's what I did wrong. I know what I did. I know what I should have done. I know I should have done better. I acknowledge it. What do you want to do? In my experience, in the places that I have worked, if you do that proactively, 90% of the time, they don't care. They're going to be totally fine with it. Yeah, it's not fun to get yourself in trouble. I tell my kids this all the time. You're a lot better off if you fess up to it voluntarily than if I have to fucking find out. Because if I have to find out that you fucked up and you're lying to me about it, or you're trying to hide it, that's not going to go well. But if you fess up, cool. Guess what? Probably the most you're going to get is just a little talking to, a virtual smack on the wrist, and that's it. But if you hide it, in medicine, if you hide mistakes, it will get found out. Usually, 9 times out of 10, especially med errors, will get found out. And especially if it has anything to do with controlled substances. You can't hide that shit. So don't try. Don't try. You mess up, cool. Acknowledge it. Be specific. And dear God, you fucking cats. Sorry, you probably can't hear it, but they're like tossing chairs and stuff. I swear, they're like fucking monsters in little bodies. But anyhow, you have to take those first steps to accept responsibility for your actions. Period. The end. Because especially with narcotics, it will bite you in the ass and you could end up in fucking jail. Or honestly, what's more than likely is you're gonna lose your job. And EMS losing your job for something like that, word gets around. Sorry, it does. You can't argue with it. It happens. How do you actually make yourself more personally accountable? Well, one, you need to be intimately familiar with your roles and responsibilities. You need to know exactly what is expected of you in your job description, which, okay, sounds like a no duh. Like you're an EMT, you're expected to do EMT things. You're a paramedic, you're expected to do paramedic things. Easy peasy, whatever. But you should be excelling at doing those and putting the effort to do those well. Just the basic things. Second is be honest immediately. And your ego is going to hate it. Your ego is going to hate admitting that you were wrong or that you messed up. But you have to. You have to. Because your ego is not as important as the patient outcome. Flat out. And your reputation will be much better if you have a reputation of being honest. Third thing, yes, apologize when you've done something wrong. Apologize to whoever, whenever, however. But the second component of that is take action. Sure, anybody can apologize, but if you don't take action to learn from your mistakes, then you haven't actually learned anything. So, apologize, but then actually do shit. Fourth thing, invest in voluntary opportunities for improvement in areas where you're lacking. So if you know that you're really bad at something, whether it's managing cardiac arrest, doing an RSI, airway patients in general, psych patients, whatever the case may be, wherever you feel that you have a deficiency, take some action. Go solve that problem. Another thing, don't overcommit yourself. Learn to delegate tasks and responsibilities. Because, and I see this with people who suffer from the paragod complex, because they want to do everything. They don't trust their EMTs to do anything. Well, if you never give someone the chance to do something, they're never going to learn how to do it properly. So maybe adjust your thinking on that. But be willing to delegate things and not overload yourself on a call. It's better to have more help than you need than to need more help than you have. I just kind of made that up. That kind of worked. Anyway, but then at the end of the day, reflect on your behavior and seek out meaningful feedback. And I have to quantify meaningful because everybody in EMS will give you feedback. Everybody will have a fucking opinion, but that doesn't mean it's meaningful, helpful, or, accurate. I've had plenty of people who had opinions about what I did, but they were quite objectively wrong and clinically outdated and just ill-informed. Cool. No need to make it a fight. Just tune it out. You don't need that. So, and I mean, when you're willingly engaging in systems that minimize errors, you're ultimately going to just get better as a clinician. You're taking it upon yourself to go out of your way to do something, even if it's a simple 5-minute training on something. You go grab some mannequin heads, or you pull a training officer aside for a few minutes and just pick their brain about something. Whatever the case may be, voluntarily participate in things to make yourself better if you're having a problem. It's not rocket science. Now, why is this so important? And we have kind of laid it out some, but I'll put it out there clearly. If we want to be taken seriously as a profession, we need to take ourselves seriously. And this is the kind of job where you are going to mess up. This is not like a factory job where you're literally just responsible for doing one thing to everything that comes by on the conveyor belt. And that's it. There's so many moving parts. There's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many learning curves. You will make mistakes until the end of your career. You will. And unfortunately, people will die as a result of it sometimes. I personally am not aware of a situation where a patient was, lethally affected by any decision I made. But I'm sure it's out there. And sometimes it's just updates in medicine. For the longest time, we were dumping fluid into trauma patients that were hemorrhaging out. And then we realized, wait a minute, that's actually making the problem worse. We need to stop doing that. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. We've actually, when it comes to trauma management like that, and this is just a side tangent, but if you don't have blood, you're a lot better off not giving fluids unless you absolutely fucking have to. And even if you do, I mean, just a fucking bare minimum to keep their MAP at like 60 to 65. I think 65 is the golden standard per PHTLS, if I remember correctly. So, there's plenty of ways in which we're probably harming patients that we don't even know. We don't even realize we're doing it. We may not find out until 20, 30 years down the road. And we're like, oh, we really shouldn't have been giving that medication. I think that's the way amiodarone is going to go. Just my personal opinion. Nobody asked for it. Nobody probably cares, but I think amiodarone is a fucking useless drug, and I think that it has no business being in pre-hospital medicine because 99% of the time I've never seen it work. I've seen lidocaine work just about every single fucking time, but you got to follow the money on that one and see who's donating to AHA and what years those donations were and were not happening and what the recommendations were during those years. But anyway, I guess a last thought with this. Your justification for why you did something is, well, that's the way I've always done it. Wrong. Like we literally just talked about. Just because you've been doing something a while doesn't mean that it's actually best practice anymore. Honestly, I would argue that, and obviously there's a lot of factors in this, I would contend that the most dangerous paramedics are actually some of the ones that have the longest years of service. Because in those years, you have room for complacency, you have room for bad habits to have developed, and shitty mindsets that ultimately are a detriment to the patient and the agency. Whereas a lot of your newer providers, assuming that they received a quality education, which is becoming more and more of a problem here lately, but assuming they got a proper education, they're probably going to treat patients more seriously, more aggressively, and more effectively than some of your older providers. Now, that is, I would say, largely anecdotal, and that is there's a very blanket statement. Obviously, there's plenty of people that I've worked with over the years who, 20 or 30 years into their career, they might as well be fucking doctors. All right, it's not a zero sum game, but as a general pattern, the way things seem to be going, and Michelle ran into this a good bit because she and I met when she was just finishing paramedic school, and I actually met her dad, who's a piece of shit, at her at her pinning ceremony, and she dealt a lot with pushback from people who would talk down to her, saying, "Oh, well, you're just inexperienced. It's okay. You'll learn." No, actually, she's right. Michelle is very attentive. She's very OCD. If you didn't know that already about her, and I frequently tell her that she's far smarter than I am. Her recall on this stuff is huge. And she has just this uncanny ability to remember shit and stay up to date on shit. So anybody who says that, oh well, you're just new, like, it's okay. Like, no, you could be learning something from these newer people. Because, and obviously anybody can come at me and say, well, she's your wife, so of course you're going to say, okay, what the fuck off. But point being, I have seen this pattern repeated for many years. So let's take ourselves seriously. Let's take our job seriously. Let's hold ourselves accountable, first and foremost, to a consistent standard that everybody knows. And then we can start moving places and getting some respect as a profession. Until we do that, I don't really see things changing a whole lot. So that's all I got. Have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye bye.